February 2002. Colombian trade union leader Gilberto Torres had been receiving threats for months. He was fighting against human rights abuses and environmental damages in Colombia caused by BP, the British petroleum company. And when another trade union leader was killed fighting for the same cause, Torres organized several oil worker strikes to send BP a message. You can't abuse Colombia and its citizens like that. Not under my watch. There was just one problem. These strikes would cause a lot of damage to BP's bottom line. Quite a dangerous endeavor, especially in Colombia. Like most oil companies in Colombia, BP had a special deal with the Colombian government. They paid $1 a barrel, a kind of additional tax, and in return, they would get special protection of their oil facilities. And who would carry out that special protection? Colombia's very own paramilitary. And these paramilitary death squads had a clear task: protect these oil pipelines at all costs, with kidnappings and bullets if necessary. So after organizing all these strikes and protests, Gilberto Torres became their #1 enemy. After a long day of work, Gilberto Torres was tired and ready to go home. On his way home, a van filled with security forces drove past him. Thinking nothing of it, he honked his horn to greet them and kept driving. But moments later, Torres saw that the van had turned around and was following him. What was going on? Had his time come? As the car caught up with him, he turned around to look at them and was suddenly staring down the barrel of a gun. They rammed him with full force, and that was the point he realized there was no chance of escaping. They got him out of the car, handcuffed and blindfolded him, and threw him into the back of their van. His worst nightmare had come true. He was in the hands of the death squad, and they showed him firsthand how they do business. First, they forced Torres to watch as they tortured another prisoner. After the man told him what they wanted to hear, they shot him twice in the neck. And then they proceeded to do something to his body that we can't talk about on YouTube without being demonetized. The next day, his kidnappers threw him in a hole filled with giant red ants and covered it with barbed wire. And to torture him even more psychologically, they told him that they also kidnapped his wife and son. He was close to losing all hope, but then something strange happened. One morning, as Torres was preparing for another day of torture, the commander told him to put on some nice clothes because he was gonna be on camera. What Torres didn't know was that his trade union colleagues had threatened more national oil strikes if they didn't let Torres go. And it worked. After 6 weeks of brutal interrogation and 10 days in a pit infested with red ants, Torres was let go, and his survival meant that his captors would be brought to trial. And who were his captors? The Self-Defense Forces of Casanare, one of Colombia's most feared paramilitary units, and they made a shocking confession. Ocensa, the oil pipeline partly owned and operated by the British oil giant BP, had ordered the hit on Gilberto Torres. The price? 100 million pesos, around $40,000. In court, the paramilitary commander stated, "They were the ones that asked us to execute this man. Not that we kidnap him, but to seize him, kill him, and make him disappear." This man organized too many shutdowns, too many unions, too many strikes. Just so we're clear here, an oil pipeline partly controlled by BP had paid mercenaries $40,000 to execute an activist because he was organizing strikes against their pipeline. But due to public pressure, they were forced to let him go, and Gilberto Torres has been living in exile ever since. But as far as BP is concerned, these confessions are just some wild allegations by some ruthless killers. To this day, BP denies any involvement in the kidnappings and killings by the paramilitary to protect their precious oil pipelines. My name is Jake Tran. I make documentaries on money, power, war, and crime in my team. Subscribe for more. If you want to win $1,000 cash, you just have to be following me at Jake Tran and you're automatically entered. A few of you have won already. Watch out for fake accounts. I will never message you asking for money. And this is BP, the most evil business in the world. High-risk people like Gilberto Torres need to take their online security extremely seriously for obvious reasons. But contrary to popular belief, you shouldn't need to be super paranoid to take your online security seriously. The internet is a part of all of our careers, even if you don't work online. Because if you get compromised online, you could get your identity stolen like someone does every 14 seconds, you could get your money stolen, your crypto stolen, your Instagram could be hacked, like I'm sure has happened to some of you or your friends, your credit score could be ruined, you could set your life back by years all because of a simple cybercrime. And guess what? All these cybercrimes are just getting more and more popular, so it's not a matter of if you'll be a victim, but when. The problem is, protecting yourself online used to mean paying for a bunch of different apps. A VPN, a password manager, identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, antivirus software. It is a lot. And just like that, you're paying around $50 a month or more for all these different services, which is totally out of the budget for most people. So wouldn't it be cool if all these vital services could be combined into an all-in-one affordable app? Well, you're in luck because that is where today's video sponsor comes in, Aura. Aura is making sure that everyone can protect themselves online. Honestly guys, I thought I was pretty safe online, but after I signed up for Aura and filled out some simple information about myself, they were able to discover that my information had already been leaked on the dark web 6 different times. Just that alone makes it worth signing up for Aura's 14-day free trial with the link below at aura.com/Jake, just to make sure you don't have any sensitive information floating around on the dark web already. But there is a lot more. You can use Aura to monitor your bank accounts for sketchy transactions. You can use it to track and lock your credit score right within the app. Locking your credit score is super important but also really tedious, but Aura lets you do it right within the app. And you can also download their antivirus software to run scans on your computer every single day automatically. And whenever Aura detects something suspicious with any of these things, you'll immediately get a text on your phone, which is super handy. Aura provides 24/7 support every day of the year, and they have a 60-day money-back guarantee. And you get all of this stuff with just one affordable subscription. So start protecting yourself from America's fastest growing crime today by going to aura.com/Jake with the link below to get your first 2 weeks for free. So pause the video and go to aura.com/Jake, and thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video.
In 1901, the British businessman and millionaire William Knox D'Arcy decided to start a new venture. He set out to look for oil in Iran. He offered the Shah of Iran a deal. If D'Arcy found any oil in Iran, he owns them. And in exchange, the Iranian government would get £20,000 in cash, £20,000 in stocks, and only 16% of the future profits. Discovering oil in your own country would be a gold mine. So for any government with a bit of self-respect, this would be a ridiculously bad deal. But since Iran's government doesn't have the know-how to drill for oil, the Shah had no choice but to agree. 16% of something is better than 100% of nothing after all. And all that money would go straight into the Shah's pockets so he could live an even more luxurious life. After the deal was made, D'Arcy hired a geologist to search for oil in the Iranian desert. But it wasn't the cozy adventure they had imagined. Smallpox raged, bandits and warlords freely roamed the desert. There was little to no fresh water, and the devastating heat of the Iranian desert didn't make the job any easier. Years went by without finding a single drop of oil, and D'Arcy's fortune started to shrink. By 1908, D'Arcy had sunk more than £500,000 into his risky venture. Even for a multimillionaire, that's a huge investment, and it looked like it wasn't going to pay off. So D'Arcy decided that it was time to pack the bags and leave Iran. He sent a message to his geologist, telling him that he was running out of money and that he needs to abort the mission. But his geologist wasn't ready to give up yet, so he ignored the message and kept going. And only a few days later, in a last-ditch effort, he finally struck oil. Suddenly, D'Arcy was the sole owner of a vast ocean of oil. And thanks to the deal he made with the Shah, no one else was allowed to drill or sell Iranian oil except for him. And he was set to be richer than his wildest dreams. On April 14, 1909, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born. And the shipping of Persian oil products began in 1913 from their new refinery in Abadan. As Iranian oil production ramped up, the British Empire started enjoying a new era of immense wealth. But the Iranian people, they were still dirt poor. Even the oil workers at the Abadan refinery were still dirt poor. They were paid 50 cents a day and had to live in a shanty town. They were surrounded by mud, stagnant water, and biting flies without clean water or electricity. These hard-working Iranians were literally giving away the country's most precious resource to the British, basically for free, while they were living in devastating poverty.
L'immense majorité vivait dans ce que nous appelons en France des bidonvilles. Alors, les conditions d'existence de ces ouvriers étaient absolument incroyables. Et surtout, on savait que l'Angleterre, c'est-à-dire la compagnie, gagnait de l'argent énormément.
بهترین منازل، بهترین اسفالت، همه تو این بریم همه انگلیسا و اینجا تو خونه گیلی بودیم زمان انگلیسا.
شرممش که بخوام بگم اگرم تو روی یه ایرانی میخندیدن مثل این که تو روی یه حیوان میخندن.
They were treating them kind of like the way we treated black Americans in pre-Civil War South, or even post-Civil War South, when we put them in economic slavery instead of real slavery.
Fast forward to 1913, shortly before World War I, and Winston Churchill was facing a problem. For one, he wanted to modernize Britain's Royal Navy and get rid of all of the ships that were still running on coal. But another problem was the British's dependence on Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller's American oil empire. The British government wanted to turn the Anglo-Persian Oil Company into their own oil empire so they wouldn't have to rely on the Americans. And with World War I just around the corner, they didn't have any time to waste. So the government bought 51% of the shares in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, making them the controlling power behind the oil company. Now with the British government calling the shots and a world war going on, the British oil business started booming. During the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, the British Empire was fueled by Iranian oil. British cars, trucks, and factories all ran on cheap Iranian oil. The Royal Navy powered its ships with Iranian oil.
حتی یک لوله 4 اینچ 5 اینچ کشیده بودن از زیر رودخانه کارون هدایت میکردن به اون طرف به عراق بنزین مجانی برای مصارف خودشون و نیروی دریایی انگلیس و غیره اونجا مصرف میکردن.
And the Iranians? They didn't even get their measly 16% cut. The British government paid them a pitiful £47,000 while they made millions from their oil. It was one of the most ruthless and one-sided deals in the history of business. And Winston Churchill later wrote, "Fortune brought us a prize from fairyland beyond our wildest dreams."
The oil coming from Iran brought millions in revenue to the British Treasury.
Under the original agreement, only about 16% of the oil revenue was supposed to be given to Iran. But that 16% was going to be calculated by the British, and no Iranian would be allowed to look at the books. We now know also that the amount was calculated after the oil company paid its taxes. Now, the oil company was owned by the British government, so when it was paying taxes, it was essentially paying taxes to itself. So it was a lot of creative accounting, but in the end, it was clear that almost all the money from this tremendous resource was going into Britain, and almost none was coming back to Iran.
But this ruthless deal was leading to some tension. Iran's Shah, or king, Reza Pahlavi, was a tough military man who ruled over Iran with an iron fist, and he could no longer accept how the British were exploiting his country. He demanded a better deal for Iran's oil, but the British were quite happy with the contract and simply stalled negotiations, until the Shah threatened to cancel it. As a result, the British made a concession. They agreed to pay about £1 million a year, and since the Shah didn't like the name Persia, they also changed the company's name to Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Iran had finally gotten something out of the deal, but it was still a slap in the face. Just £1 million a year for the billions of dollars the British oil company would continue to make? It was ridiculous. The oil company also promised to increase the oil workers' salaries, build schools, hospitals, and roads, but those promises would also not be fulfilled on. To get back at the British, the Shah started doing business with the Germans during World War II. You know, the enemy of the British. So for the British, that was the last excuse they needed to get rid of the Shah for good. So in August 1941, the British and Soviets started a military assault to overthrow the Shah. On the outside, it was all about defeating the evil Germans and their allies. But deep down, it was all about securing all that precious oil bubbling below Iran's soil. 1 month later, they disposed of the Shah and put his son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi on the throne.
Als der Vater nach seiner Abdankung Iran verlassen hat, blieb Mohammad Reza zurück. Also der Vater Reza Shah hat ihn auch zurückgelassen, hat eben auch gesagt, du musst das hier übernehmen, du bleibst hier.
But Mohammad wasn't anything like his father. He was more like a smooth-talking politician instead of a ruthless king. And at only 21 years old and born into power, he would have a hard time keeping a powerful nation like the British at bay. After World War II, the idea of nationalism swept through the developing world. And in Iran, that meant one thing. We've got to take back our oil from the evil British. The Iranian people were tired of handing over their precious oil to the British, more or less for free, while the Shah and the British continued to amass more and more wealth. Something had to change. and from the ashes rose one man that promised to take on both the British and the Shah, to give Iran back to its people, and that man went by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was a man of integrity, an incorruptible politician who wanted to turn Iran into a wealthy, well-educated nation. And on April 28, 1951, Mossadegh became Iran's new prime minister with the full support of its people. He promised that from now on, oil profits would be used to develop Iran, not enrich Britain. And fortunately, he was one of the few leaders who actually followed through with his words. Only a few days later, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which meant that he took the oil industry back from the British and put the Iranian government in charge of it. Iranians now finally had the chance to make a better living for themselves, and over the next few decades, it could even turn Iran into one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the British? They were fuming. To them, taking their most lucrative business away from them was an act of war. So the British removed their technicians from Iran's oil fields, they blockaded the port, they cut off exports of vital goods to Iran, and they organized a full-blown boycott of Iranian oil. The Iranians were completely on their own. Without the know-how or connections to drill and sell their oil, they were back to square one. But their hatred for the British was so intense that they would never give up. Little did they know that the British government was only getting started. For the British, it was time to overthrow this Mossadegh guy. So the British turned to Washington with a simple request. Please overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh for us so we can have our oil back. But Harry Truman, the US president at that time, didn't see the point of a US intervention in Iran. The US didn't have any skin in this fight, so he rejected the request. For a moment, the British thought about invading Iran themselves. But then Dwight Eisenhower became the next US president in November 1952. He was a devoted anti-communist, and so was his Secretary of State John Dulles. So as soon as it was announced Eisenhower would be the next president, MI6, Britain's version of the CIA, sent an agent to America to discuss possibilities. The British told the Americans that nationalization and land reform sounded a lot like something called communism, that communists had infiltrated the Iranian government, that if the US doesn't act now, the entire Middle East could fall into communism. In 1953, the CIA got the green light for Operation Ajax. Their mission? Get Mossadegh out of the government, dead or alive. Less than a month later, Mossadegh was overthrown, the Shah was back in power, and the British? By the end of 1953, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company resumes its usual operations. This time, it was renamed to something that might sound a little familiar, BP, or the British Petroleum Company. The Iran coup of 1953 was the first time the CIA had overthrown a democratic government. To the CIA, it was one of the most successful covert operations in their entire history. But little did they know that this one small act of aggression, this one decision to strip away the Iranian people's control over their country's own destiny, would be the first domino to fall in what would lead to some of the biggest terror attacks in the world. The Iranian coup of 1953 sowed the seeds of Middle Eastern terror. But to cover the entire Iran coup of 1953 and the terror that followed would not only be beyond the scope of this video, but it would also get this video demonetized. That's why we've just released it as a new private documentary only available to members of this channel that you can watch right now by clicking the join button below. Channel members have been loving it, and if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within your first month of joining and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund. Pause the video and click that join button below right now. Now back to the story of BP. Date, April 20th, 2010. Location, BP's Deepwater Horizon oil rig, 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana. It was a perfectly calm night. At around 19:55, crew members checked the pressure readings on the well to see if it was under control. Despite some anomalies, the test didn't raise any concerns. It looked like just another night on the oil rig. But below their feet, a storm was brewing. At 21:38, gas burst through the well and into the pipe leading up to the rig. A few minutes later, mud began raining down on the deck, and the crew made a call to shut down the well. But it was too late. One siren signal after another went off, while the pressure of the drill pipe skyrocketed. 21:49. 4 minutes after they made the call to shut the well, the power went out. The oil rig plunged into darkness. A few seconds later, all hell broke loose. 2 massive explosions shook the oil rig to its core. Some of the men were forced to jump 60 feet into the water so they wouldn't be engulfed in flames. In a last desperate attempt to get the situation under control, the crew tried to get the blowout preventer in place, the ultimate failsafe on the ocean floor, but it failed. At around 10 p.m., the Mayday call went out. Deepwater Horizon was lost. "11 people died, 17 more were injured. And in the 3 months after the accident, 210 million gallons of crude oil leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. Coasts of several US states and Mexico were damaged, and fishing businesses in the Gulf of Mexico came to a grinding halt. It was the biggest oil catastrophe in US history. The obvious cause of the explosion was that gas had floated up through the drill and ignited into a fireball. But the real reason was BP's endless greed and recklessness. Leasing the Deepwater Horizon cost BP $1 million a day, and they had fallen way behind schedule. So they brushed aside any concerns that could slow down the drilling and threaten their profits. It was later found out that BP's flawed well design, cracks in the cement, and other cost-saving decisions that increased the risk of an accident were all ignored. No one dared to put a stop to the oil production to ensure a safer working environment. The pressure to maximize profits and make shareholders happy was too big, so they ignored another kind of pressure. During the public outrage, BP took responsibility for the accident, and over the years, they'd have to pay $65 billion for the cleanup and fines, including more than $10 billion to US fishermen and businesses. But Mexico, they allegedly didn't receive a single penny. BP simply denied that the oil had reached Mexico at all. But in Mexico, they knew better. Before the accident, about 95% of the villages along the Mexican coast made a living from fishing. They were famous for their prawns and oysters. But after the accident, fishing businesses were as good as dead. Young people were forced to seek factory work in faraway cities to support their families. And it could take 20 to 25 years for the ecosystem to recover from the contamination. Will anyone ever go to jail for this accident? Of course not. US prosecutors dropped manslaughter charges against 2 BP employees connected to the oil spill disaster. They didn't even go after BP's executives, just normal employees. The father of 28-year-old Gordon Jones, who died in the Deepwater Horizon explosion, said, "The fact that no one will ever spend a moment behind bars for having killed 11 men by their greed, by their negligence based entirely on greed, is astonishing to me."
Hope you guys enjoyed the video today. Don't forget we just released a new private documentary on the 1953 Iranian coup and the roots of Middle Eastern terror. Super good video. I'm very proud of it. And you can watch it right now by clicking that join button below. Remember, you can follow me on Instagram at Tran for a chance to win $1,000. But that's gonna wrap it up. Stay dangerous out there, and I will see you guys in the next one.